Our group has chosen to research integration in Sweden, a contemporary issue affecting the 10 million Swedish inhabitants. In recent years, Sweden has exhibited a welcoming attitude towards refugees. During the 2015 refugee crisis, Sweden was successful in taking in a huge number of people seeking refuge from countries where they had previously suffered from and been victim to persecution, violence, and unemployment, amongst other challenges. Due to this welcoming attitude, Sweden quickly became one of the most attractive countries in Europe for people to seek refuge in, and our sources revealed that this was perhaps due to its governance, strong political systems, and their growing involvement in the refugee crisis. Although it can't be denied that there was some resistance, generally speaking, the Swedish people themselves were very supportive of government policies concerning the increasing number of immigrants in Sweden. Statistics revealed that there were 116,000 Syrian citizens residing in Sweden in 2016, with roughly 5,500 of these registering as asylum seekers. A more recent study from 2019 revealed that the majority of people emigrating to Sweden came from Afghanistan and Syria, with India following closely behind. Therefore, a large majority, and more specifically 2/3 of immigrants were coming from outside of the Nordics or EU. And a vast majority of people who moved to Sweden did so to reunite with family, and it's also important to note that employment was another factor. Immigrants who came to Sweden for work increased in 2019 in comparison to other years by 14%, and Stockholm was the city to take in the most refugees. Swedish authorities and organisations are actively carrying out extensive research on patterns and trends concerning and emigration. Throughout history, Sweden has had a large number of its population migrating, then immigrating, and since the 2000s, and specifically in 2015, this statistic has been switched around, as the graph shows. The goal of this research is to investigate how these trends will affect Sweden in the future, and the policies which have been imposed aim to integrate refugees and immigrants into society in a positive and perhaps sensitive way. Our group also researched current activities, laws and policies in order to get an idea of the current situation. And one of these policies was integration through educational systems. So Sweden has attempted to implement multicultural policies which have focused on positive rights, for example, supporting minority schools and supporting mother tongue instruction. Other initiatives include step-in jobs and introduction dialogue. Furthermore, there are mentoring schemes, and the government intends to initiate a 3-year membership project where new arrivals are matched with mentors on the basis of their occupation and education, and 5 million krona a year has been allocated to these activities. There are also free bus passes which will allow asylum seekers to travel for free, and it intends to ameliorate the problems caused by having large asylum seeker accommodation centres away from major settlements, which can result in it being difficult for poorer asylum seekers to venture outside of their community and thus integrate into society. Immigrants aged 20 to 65 are also eligible for a special form of support. If they have either arrived recently or been granted a residence permit, they can be registered on the introduction programme and receive an introduction benefit. The Arbetsförmedlingen helps recently arrived refugees or immigrants get started in their new community, and they can meet with an official to talk about what they need to do in order to start looking for work, and they're given a plan which includes various activities to help them get on their way to getting a job, including Swedish for immigrants, a language course, employment preparations, for example traineeships or validation of your education and work experience, and a civic orientation course for understanding of Swedish society. The government prioritises integration and views it as an essential issue, as you might have already guessed by now. In 2019, they introduced an Anti-Discrimination Act, which was to combine earlier and outdated legislation and create a common framework. So you can just imagine how far they've come since 2019. And this new framework was more effective and transparent and included a new penalty named compensation for discrimination, which aimed to prevent people from discriminating against others. Most of the larger cities in Sweden have urban districts where discrimination is common due to the high number of immigrants which live in these districts. And in order to improve discrimination in these districts, the government have signed and created agreements in which they define the responsibilities of each town. So far, they have 21 metropolitan towns on board. They're also holding the police, the Swedish Social Insurance Agency and the Swedish Public Employment Service accountable. They've entered into partnerships with these organisations with the purpose in mind to enable the organisations to effectively coordinate their work in these districts. In 2018, the government established a support organisation to combat racism and other forms of intolerance, and 6 million krona a year has been allocated to this support. Although there's been lots of positives, there's also a conflicting review as suggested by an article from The Local. According to the Council of Europe's human rights body, Sweden has made considerable progress in combating xenophobia and segregation, but improvements could be made, especially concerning the labour and housing market, according to the ECRI. They also thought that they could make improvements when it concerns preventing ethnic residential segregation. So in conclusion, how successful has integration been in Sweden? The results of integration measures in Sweden have been relatively mixed. According to figures from Sweden's Public Employment Agency, the unemployment rate among Sweden's foreign-born population was 22.2% compared to 4% among Sweden-born citizens. More than 1 in 4 Swedes living in immigrant households are currently in poverty, compared to the much lower figure of 15.4% for those living in native-born households. And according to the OEC, only 8% of migrant women were employed after 2 years of moving to Sweden. But despite this, there have been some successes. In comparison to the rest of Scandinavia, Sweden's integration methods are regarded as the best, with migrants having a better chance of finding a job. Furthermore, while it can take a while, but after 10 to 15 years, 70% of migrant groups work, and that percentage is gradually increasing. Crime has also remained steady, which proves in a way that integration has been successful. One can point to the success of integration of refugees from Yugoslavia following the conflicts in the 90s. Of those who received residence permits in 1993, 90% of male and 80% of females in various regions were employed by 1999, with gaps with other regions declining at the start of the new millennia.